Hey, this is David for Big Bits and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about PineScript coding conventions. You might also refer to this as a style guide for your Pine scripts or your code in Pine that you use on TradingView. Now, if you're not familiar with the channel, please subscribe because if you're watching this video, then you're probably interested in PineScript, and this channel we do a lot of PineScript tutorials and talk about TradingView, cryptocurrency, and things like that as well. So definitely subscribe if you haven't already, and just watch the whole video because there's a lot of good information in this one the whole way through. I'm not just showing you something completed. I want to go over all of the styling guide or the coding conventions and explain to you exactly what each of them mean and kind of why they're important as well. And we're going to be looking at an example here from the Pine Coders group. Now this is a group of people who work to support Pine and TradingView in that aspect with Pine, and they have created this coding conventions. I like to refer to them as a style guide because that's what I'm used to referring to these sorts of things as. So essentially, we're trying to structure our code and make it look a certain way over and over. That way, if somebody were to write a script, it would be very easy for other more advanced programmers to pick it up and read it. Now, if you're a beginner programmer, it doesn't really matter too much about these, although there are some general rules that you might like to know in here about the syntax of Pine and things that will help you make your code look a little bit better regardless of how you write your variable names. But for those of you who are a little bit more advanced or an intermediate level programmer, this might be a good idea to do, especially if you're publishing scripts on TradingView. I'm going to try to start using some of these, but where I work with a lot of tutorial videos and beginners, I tend to make it the most readable code that I can, and some of these names aren't really that well suited for being readable for beginners. So let's go ahead and get started. There's four different categories here for the table of contents. There's script structure, naming conventions, spacing, and line wrapping. Now the first two are probably going to be the biggest ones, but I wanted to share this link with you here. This is the Pinecoder script that we're going to be using as a reference here for all this stuff. They have most of the items in their style guide in here, and what isn't in here, it's going to be easy enough to tell you what's going on. And I didn't personally write a script for this one because it would have been a waste of my time. There's plenty of other scripts out here that have done their code with this style guide, this coding convention, that I don't really have to do it myself. I can just show you what they've done. Okay, so the first thing, and we've talked about this in the tutorial series, is the first thing you need in your script structure is the version name, and this is a comment that tells the compiler what version of Pine you are going to use to compile your code in. And once it tries to compile, it knows what rules to use from which particular version. So this is the first thing you need to do in all of your scripts. You can see here they have declared the version number first in that comment. Now you might also like to add other notes such as the author, the version number, the name of the script, and some other notes that would be useful for this. Now they've also mentioned that here using the version you can add your comments whatever you'd like. It doesn't have to be structured the same way as this after you do your versioning. Now after you're done with all of your comments, including the versioning, then they would like to see the actual study or strategy function called. Now, if you're not familiar with Pine or you haven't watched the tutorial series we've done, these two functions, the study and strategy, are pretty much what tell Pine whether you're trying to actually execute or backtest a strategy, or if you're just going to kind of use this as an indicator and not perform any back testing or try to do any sort of automated trading through their connected brokerages. Now, let's actually get back here. Let's take a look at the next one. So this is something that's kind of common for those of us who actually work with code on a more routine basis, and that is working with inputs. These are essentially variables, and what you're doing with your inputs, you're placing them directly after your study or strategy, and that's because first of all, the study and strategy is required to be in the script, so you might as well do that first. We have to do our inputs next because we're pretty much declaring our variables that we know we must have, and these are also user settings that you can interact with on the chart, and you can change by just selecting different values or typing in different values. Now if we go back here, I don't see, okay, here they are. I thought they didn't have them at first, but here are the inputs. Now we have covered all of these on our tutorial series, so you should know what these are if you've watched those, what they actually mean, and we'll go into these a little bit more in a minute. But your inputs and your variables, either those declarations, are due here directly after the study or the strategy. And that's what it kind of mentions here, the variable initializations, pretty much right after your inputs. So perhaps here we would have moved the, well actually the variables here are actually used as part of their options, so that's why they appear to be a bit out of order. So they actually require these for their inputs, so they do those first. But you can see here there's another variable, and that is declared immediately after. Now for the rest of their code, they've actually defined these sections for you. So this is the section for the functions. You can see there's several functions in a row here, and we'll go over exactly kind of what's going on here in a minute. But our functions that we're going to use for the study or the strategy come next. Now you see they have quite a few for this particular one. Now what we do after that is we work on our calculations. So now we have the functions that we need to do our calculations, or functions that we need for other reasons such as colors, and we also have all the variables we're going to work with, or at least the ones that we needed beforehand. And now we can actually calculate values and save those or work with those however we need to. So what they do next is they have a section for their calculations. Now there are a few new variables here, but those are because we are working with existing variables and saving into new ones. And you don't necessarily have to do that. If you want to update the value of an existing variable, you can always do that with this operator here, and this variable has already been declared and you're resetting its value to whatever the result is of this statement. Okay, so now that we have that and we have our calculations done, we pretty much have all of our data that we're going to be using for the study or the strategy. We've already calculated everything, so everything you can think of that you want to do with your script, you should have all of the information you need to make your decisions at this point. And what we're going to be doing next is doing a plot. Now this is the part where we're actually drawing on the chart, if you choose to do so. If you're doing a strategy, you don't necessarily need to draw anything on the chart because you're going to be focused more on the back test results. Although it is often pretty handy to help troubleshoot your strategies if you are plotting things on the chart. And there's a lot of different ways and different things you can actually plot on the chart. So go back and check out videos on that, or check out the PineScript reference manual. There's a lot more things that we haven't even covered that you can actually plot. Now, as far as the plots go, usually with studies, that's pretty much all you do is just plot things so that you can look at them and compare the data. Although it does get a little bit more interesting than that with using alert conditions, and we'll touch on that in just a moment. But the plot calls, where we're putting things on the chart or on their own chart, not overlaid on the one you're looking at, you can plot those as well. Now after we've plotted everything on the chart that we're going to be using, you can see they had a section for plots here. Then we would have a section for our strategy calls. Now this is if you were only using the strategy function at the very beginning. So up here at the beginning, we would have had to use strategy instead of study, and we would have needed to call the strategy functions down here after our plots, and we would have told it to enter or exit positions based on other logic that we have come up with, or you can just tell it to do it based on whatever you come up with. You don't have to do a bunch of calculations if you don't want to. You can just do it however you need it, okay? Now, the alert conditions are the last thing, and if you haven't watched the video on the custom alerts that I've done, that will help you a lot if you go back and check on what that is for the alert conditions. Essentially, with indicators, what you can do is you can create your own custom alerts. So instead of just using the built-in alert conditions built into TradingView, such as moving average 1 crossing over moving average 2, you can actually get a little bit more in depth with a single alert. You can say, I want moving average 1 to cross over moving average 2. They both have to be above moving average 3, and moving average 3 has to be moving down. Something like that. You can do that with just one alert that way, and it will be very beneficial for you to reduce the amount of alerts you have in that way if you haven't been using it that way. So that kind of takes care of the structure and the order of how you should be doing things in Pine. Now you'll notice I've pretty much done it like this in most of my videos, but you can always mix these up. These are just style guidelines. You don't have to do it this way, although you'll notice if you try to do it a different way, sometimes you'll have issues with your order and the way things are made, and you're probably going to end up doing something like this anyway. Okay, so next up are the naming conventions, and this is the part that's really going to throw the beginners off because it makes things look really difficult for beginners, and it makes them look harder to read. So with variable names, we are using camel case based on their coding conventions, and camel case just means you start off in all lowercase, and then the next word within that name is capitalized. So you can see it starts lowercase here, and then the next word is capitalized. But if you have more than one word after that, then all of the other words are capitalized as well. So that's important to know with camel case. Now, for me personally, I have been doing in the videos a little bit differently. I will capitalize the first word, and I will also capitalize the acronyms as well. So EMA here, based on theirs, this is all lowercase. But for me, I would capitalize E, M, and A, and then also length in mine. Now, there's show signal here. I would have just capitalized the S at the beginning of show, and also kept signal capitalized as well. So, like I said, you can do these however you want, however is best readable for you. But if you're going to be publishing scripts a lot in Pine, I definitely recommend you follow these. It's going to help you a lot. Now, for function names, this is simply just the name of your function. All we're doing is just prefixing the function with F underscore, and then we also use the camel case after that. So for example, you can see one here, F underscore days in months. So the camel case starts after the underscore, and you're going to be lowercase on the first one, and then uppercase on the beginning of each word after that. Now for function parameter names, this is often helpful in many different programming languages, and that is you put an underscore before your variable names that you use as parameters in your functions. Now let's go to one of the actual functions they have here, and this might help some of you. Alright, you can see this function underscore TF res in minutes. It has a parameter underscore res, and you can see how it's used here later on in the function. So you're passing in a value into the function, and it's referring to it with the name that you set in the parameter. And with the naming on that, I forgot to mention, this is also camel case as well, similar to our variable names, and obviously start with lowercase and the camel case afterwards. I'm sorry, I thought I got messed up there, but it's actually the parameter names that we're starting with. Those should also be camel case, but it doesn't appear they have any that are long enough. Although they might not be using camel case here. I thought they did. If they don't, that's my apologies. So yeah, these are all lowercase for them, although like I said, you can always do these however you want, but I would probably use camel case on the parameter names as well, just because that's what they're doing everywhere else here. Now their dependencies, this is just letting you know that your function uses a variable that was already declared outside of the scope of the function. And what I mean by that is the function by default usually just works with the data within the function. Now, a dependency is when you need to reference data outside of this particular function. So for example, we need to know the length multiplier, but that was an input. So we are depending on this length multiplier up here, and we need to identify that if you're following these coding conventions. Now, they also recommend that you can also pass this in as a parameter. That way you don't have to actually define the fact that you're using a dependency. And this makes your code to where you have to have it correct before it will compile. If you don't pass in both of these, then it won't compile correctly. It'll throw an error. So if you don't pass in the length and you just do the multiplier, then it will give you an error that you need to use both parameters, and then you'll have to put in the input value as your parameter, and it'll be completely fine after that. Now, the local scope variables, this is essentially just variables that we use within a function or within a as it says, a local scope. We're not working with the entire study or strategy here. These variables pretty much get destroyed when we're done with the current segment of code that they're in. So within a function, within an if statement, or within a for loop, if we declare a variable there, once we are out of the function or out of the if or for loop, then that variable is just kind of gone. You don't get to use it in the rest of your study or your strategy at that point. Now that pretty much covers all of the variable stuff, and like I said, throwing in all these underscores, lower cases, prefixes, things like that can confuse beginners, but if you're even intermediate or advanced, then this is probably pretty common and something you've seen quite a lot of. All right, on to spacing. This is very simple. Let me go up and make sure there aren't any other sections. Spacing and line wrapping. So these are the final two sections. There's not much to it here, but this basically just says that if you are using an operator, you need a space on both sides of it. So you're going to have a space before the operator and also after, and that needs to be for all of them. It's pretty simple, but it makes the code much more readable as well. And I tend to do this myself anyways without having to have a convention to tell me that. And you likely probably do as well, just because it is easier to read for most people. Now, line wrapping, this isn't something we've particularly covered, although we have talked about spacing in the script tutorials before, and how if you're inside of an if statement or a function or a for loop, you have to do 4 spaces on the next line to have your code execute within that particular scope. Whereas line wrapping is just allowing you to continue writing the current line of code that you're in on the next line so that the code can be more readable. Now you can see this here as well. We are working with a plot function here, and there's a lot of different properties to this plot, and we're defining those values. But if this was all in one line, it would come out really here, and it might be a little bit harder to read. So what you're going to do is you're going to start a new line, and you're just going to do 2 spaces. Now you can't use your tab key to do that because the tab key will do 4 spaces. So you're going to have to manually tap that space key twice, and then you can set your properties and make sure you use a comma between your properties just like you would if it was a single line, and then you can start your new line as many times as you need. So that pretty much does it for this particular video on the coding conventions or the styling guide for PineScript. The people over at Pine Coders have done a great job. I definitely recommend you check out their profile. They have a bunch of great scripts with a bunch of great resources in it. I can't begin to say enough just how much great stuff they do for Pine that a lot of people aren't even aware of yet. So definitely check out their scripts. Their profile on TradingView is, of course, Pine Coders. Now, if you want to check out mine and you haven't already, you can always check out my profile in the description of the video. And while you're down there, please like the video and subscribe as well. We do these types of videos. We keep up to date with TradingView, crypto, and other things. So definitely, if you like the video, subscribe and you'll get updates on when we do new videos here on the channel. Now also, if you've been following along on Pine or you're interested in a paid plan on TradingView, please check out the referral link also in the description of the video. That'll get you $30 off your upgraded paid plan on TradingView, as well as $30 for me on my next paid plan as well. And to help keep the channel going, I'd really appreciate it if you could do that if you're considering that paid plan. But other than that, we are done for this video. I'd like to thank you and welcome you back to watch another video on Pine here soon. But other than that, have a nice day.